Hello and welcome to this very special edition of the Irish Wrestling Podcast in association with BodySlam.net. My name is Mark O'Brien. I've been joined today by those of us from this part of the world who are particularly fans of independent wrestling, as well as those of us who were BT Sports subscribers for a long time. We're a big fan of Mr. Eddie Dennis. Eddie, hello, my friend. How are you today?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
No problem at all. Listen, as I said before, I'm a huge fan of your work. A lot of fans of this part of the world, from an Irish audience, be very familiar with work, be it from Progress, Rev Pro, obviously your appearances across like the likes of Attack over in Wales. Again, as I mentioned, BT Sport UK, but for American fans who may not be as familiar with your work, who may not be keeping up to date with the superior brand of independent wrestling that is the UK and Irish scene, can you give people a bit of flavour of your own background as well, please?
Yeah, so I started wrestling in 2008, so it's been sort of 16 years now. I went over and trained in Canada at Scott Demore's Can-Am Wrestling in 2009, I think it was. Trained under Tyson Dukes over there, so I kind of credit him with like my foundations. I had trained in Wales before going out there at Celtic Wrestling and sort of had my first pro matches, but I certainly wouldn't have considered myself a professional wrestler. And then in 2011, was it? We started up Defend. I'm not sure of the year, but me, Mark Andrews, and Pete Dunne, obviously in the early 2010s, wrestling looked very, very different to what it looks like now, and certainly to what it looked like in like the boomish periods of like 2016, 2017, that kind of time, you know. Um, so yeah, I we started up Defend Indie Wrestling, which was an independent clothing company,
Mhm.
with the little turnbuckle logo. You've seen that turnbuckle
Yep.
logo crop up a bunch of places since then, but let it be known that it was me, Mark, and Pete who scribbled the aesthetic of a turnbuckle with one hook up and one hook down. Looked kind of cool as a logo for a brand, has been used a million times since. And yeah, we started that up, where Mark and Pete, along with a guy called Jim Lee, started up a wrestling promotion called Attack Pro Wrestling. And then we were part of the early Progress shows. So Progress started in the garage in Islington in front of like 300 people. And built to the Electric Ballroom in front of 800, eventually went on to like Alexandra Palace, Brixton Academy, and sort of culminated in that show in Wembley Arena. Myself and Mark were kind of privileged to be a part of that whole journey, that whole progress, pun intended, through.
Mm.
During that whole time, I was working as a school teacher.
Yep.
And then when the Brit Rest boom, as people would affectionately call it now, sort of reached its precipice, I decided to step away from teaching and wrestle full time in 2017. Signed to the WWE in 2018. Was part of their brand NXT UK, which was like a subdivision of NXT for American fans who are familiar with that, but was based here in the UK. Started off as a touring brand that went to different venues and filmed sort of 4 to 6 episodes of weekly episodic television, in bursts. Then the pandemic happened, so we moved into an empty warehouse in London to film television. That brand closed down in 2022. I worked as a writer for NXT after that for 9 months in 2023. And now I'm sort of back hustling on the indies. So that is a whistle stop tour through the life of Eddie Dennis.
Yeah, very much with stop tour. And like you kind of you're selling yourself short in the teaching front as well, because not only were you teaching at the same time as wrestling, you're actually a headmaster. Now, when I saw that, like I'm 32, and like if I was a headmaster at 32, I'd be doing very well for myself. So to be doing that, juggling a school, like running a school, plus teaching, plus then wrestling at the weekends, plus then chasing a career, be it with WWE or trying to make this a full-time thing, plus a clothing brand, plus helping people launch promotions and whatnot. How difficult was that, those that period, like where you're obviously living 100 miles an hour? I doubt you're sleeping very much. You probably got a family and whatnot at the same time. How difficult was that period in your career?
Yeah, so I mean, around that time, kind of like 2016, 2017, 2016 was when the boom was kind of, it felt really hot and it felt like it could be hotter. And a lot of the guys who I was friends with and kind of grown up with, they were all 5 or 6 years younger than me. So none of them had kind of like reached that point in their life. I was 30 years old by 2016, you know? So Mark and Pete were probably like 23, 24, that kind of age.
Yeah.
They didn't need to have full-time occupations. You know, I already had a mortgage and stuff. So I had resigned, I think it was 24, maybe 2012, 2013. I'd kind of resigned that pro wrestling was going to be something I did on the side as a hobby, and teaching was going to be my profession. I remember when I was literally working in a boarding school as a resident tutor and was saving money with the intention of moving back out to Canada, or maybe trying to get something in Japan, or trying to get something going with regards to wrestling. And I applied for a role in middle management at a school as a head of year nine. And I kind of told myself, well, if I get this role, then teaching will be my profession. That'll be the thing that sort of like, I hang my hat on, and wrestling will become a hobby. And I got that role, and my mindset shifted. I went from trying to like hustle to get as many bookings as I could to kind of just trying to stick to one a weekend. And that was my mindset throughout that time of like 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016. I do one show a weekend, a little bit more during the holidays, but and during that process, I went from being a head of year to a head of house to then a head teacher or a principal, as
Yeah.
like Americans would know it as, of the school. And I did 2 years of that.
Okay.
And in 2016, I was really considering sort of like stepping away from pro
Yeah.
wrestling because I was struggling to
Yeah.
manage both. As I say, this whole time, this career trajectory of teaching was happening, this boom in independent wrestling was happening. And, in 2012, when I just started juggling both roles, we were wrestling in front of 60 people in a carnival. It didn't really matter.
Yeah.
But then in 2014, 2015, we start wrestling in front of 1,500 people, 2,000 people. The WWE start paying attention. They're coming over here to get people to do tryout matches on independent shows for the Cruiserweight Classic. And it all felt, very serious all of a sudden. And the guys who were that little bit younger than me, who were still living with their parents, all
Yeah.
of a sudden were kind of making enough money to pay rent on independent wrestling, which was sort of unheard of. Which was kind of why in 2017 it was really one or the other. I couldn't
Yeah.
carry on wrestling because the scene was the way it was back then. I couldn't carry on wrestling at an independent level and be a head teacher at the same time. The safe thing would have been to leave teaching and leave wrestling, sorry, and focus on teaching. But it just felt like a bit of a time. Me and my wife didn't have I mean we still don't, but like we didn't have kids. That like I had a mortgage, but I knew I could pay that back on a
Mm.
monthly basis, you know. It just seemed like a bit like an opportunity where I could take a calculated risk and it wouldn't be the end of the world if it didn't work out, which is why I decided. But I did decide to step away from teaching
Mhm.
because of that thing that you said at the very, to go back to your original
Yeah.
question, of that juggling being really, really, really difficult. The only reason I stepped away from teaching really was because I couldn't be a head teacher and an independent wrestler at the level that I wanted to be at. And I just thought that if I dedicated myself
Mm.
completely to the professional wrestling, I'd seen Mark get offered a contract with TNA and then get offered a subsequent contract with WWE. I'd seen Pete get offered a contract with
Mm.
WWE, Tyler, Ben, a bunch of these people. And I just thought that I could be with them if I could just focus all of my attention on that, you know what I mean? Which
Yeah.
is what I did, and it
No,
worked out.
fair play. I mean, like going through that period, like you having to juggle a million and one things. And then, I'd say you're wrestling for the sake, like your team with Mark Andrews at one point, and you're appearing on weekends with him in Progress. But during the week, he's over in Orlando or wherever it is, team or taping with TNA, and you're going back to being a headmaster of a school. Like how much of a, I suppose, sense of fulfillment was that for you, or personal satisfaction that in 2018, when I suppose you're being signed to NXT UK the same time these guys are. You're debuting at NXT UK, you're facing Ciscala, making lots of appearances, lots of matches, you're getting to appear at TakeOver. How much of that kind of personal satisfaction do you get at that time?
Yeah, I mean, I told Mark when Mark originally signed with TNA, we did one match in Progress at like chapter 17
Yeah.
where we wrestled each other as like a babyface match just after dropping the tag titles. And then I spoke to Progress Management and asked if I could have the microphone after the match, but I didn't want Mark to know about it. And I didn't really know what I was going to say. I just wanted at that time, that was Mark's swan song for independent wrestling. Do you know what I mean? Obviously, contracts were weird and they
Yeah.
changed, and it turns out you carry on working places, and no one really had a swan song from the Indies. But it felt like that. It felt like that at the time. It felt like he was going to move to Orlando, and that was going to be it. We weren't going to see any more of him, because that's kind of what had happened with Spud.
Yeah.
He'd moved over with TNA, and that was it. We never really saw him on the Indies that much again. An odd appearance here or there. So I did a promo with him, and during that promo I said that I was resigned. I was like satisfied with being a weekend warrior. I mentioned in the promo that I was applying to be the head teacher of a school, which is funny because I went on to get that job, you know what I mean? But Mark getting that contract with TNA vindicated every decision we'd ever made, justified every decision that me and my friends had ever made, every birthday party or something we'd missed because we'd prioritized pro wrestling over things that we probably shouldn't have prioritized pro wrestling over. Like, it was justified because of that one contract. So I think to for it to be like years down the line and to
Yeah.
like sit in a locker room for the WWE where we're all earning an annual salary instead of some like, a fiver and a hot dog. And in that locker room, Wild Boar, Mike Hitchman's in there, Flash Morgan Webster's in there,
Yeah.
Mark Andrews is in there, Pete Dunne's in there, Tyler Bates in there, Trent Seven's in there, like all these people who we kind of grew up together within the industry. And that's kind of what was really special about NXT UK, is it wasn't previous to NXT UK. Obviously, if someone made it from the UK, it was one or two guys. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like Drew and Sheamus went up together. Before them, there was Burchill. Before Burchill, I didn't even know who
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
went up before Burchill. Do you know what I mean? Probably the British Bulldog. Like, it's literally they were that few and far
Yeah.
between. Burchill's sister, I think. Like they were that few and far between that people went up. So with the UK brand, it was really cool because we were with all of our friends, and it was something that I'd go on to do, like public speaking events for sixth form schools and stuff.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I realized during that whole time is, like, as a 5-year-old, I always said that my dream was to be a WWE wrestler, but like I definitely revised that to just like, actually my dream was to do a job with all my friends,
Yeah.
because it didn't really matter whether it was that, it needed to be enough money that we could go home and be comfortable.
Yeah.
And then as long as it was that and it was with all our friends, it was going to be the best time. Do you know what I mean? So the factor that it was that there were WWE logos on the corner posts,
Yeah. Yeah.
and when we got backstage, Triple H or Shawn Michaels would give us our feedback, was surreal and cool. But the real,
Yeah. Yeah.
the bit that was really special was that we shared it all with all of our friends.
Spot on, and it felt like the kind of that when NXT UK kind of came about, it felt like, as I say, kind of culmination of the work of so many different people and so many different promotions all around the UK, be it from yourselves and the kind of progress side of things, or even in Wales at the TAC, or then the guys coming down from ICW and whatnot. It felt like there's a bit of kind of a momentum, a surge of momentum kind of brought to that point. Now people can make accusations about why WWE set up in the UK. That's kind of neither here nor there. But like, for those of us who were following NXT UK religiously on a weekly basis on BT Sport, it felt like there was momentum building. Like us in Dublin, we were due to get a takeover, and then obviously the world
Right?
closes down,
You guys
closes
got it
down, and then
worse,
suddenly
right?
you're in a TV studio for 2 years, and then suddenly bang, you're gone. So like, what was that
Yeah.
like for you guys? Like, I mean, you're obviously building something organic. You're doing the takeover shows in Blackpool. You're doing the UK Championship tournament. You're getting weekly TV. People are starting to become a bit more familiar with who's on the show and doing what. What was that like for you? I suppose like building something, and then suddenly it feels like it's completely out of your hands. I imagine.
Yeah, it was a funny time because obviously it was very exciting to be a part of something that was new, and just like you touched on, you'll get people who have opinions on why the WWE came over here. I really, like, I'm pretty cynical at times. I think it's a really, really, really cynical thing, like, take to think that they wanted to damage a scene. I think they wanted to cash in
Yeah,
on a
100%. We'll
scene.
make money on it. Like,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Of,
yeah,
of course they wanted to make money on a scene, but I don't think they wanted to, like,
yeah,
damage a scene that was,
yeah,
and I think that they had they were probably nervous about what World of Sport could become.
yeah,
But, obviously nothing really became of
yeah,
that.
yeah,
But yeah, I think for us it felt exciting. It felt like we were on the ground floor of this, like, we had a talk when we were at WWE where they spoke to us about this principle of local globalization.
Okay.
So the idea of rather than just having a purely global market, have local markets on a global scale. So you've got lots of different localized like the best way to have this principle that the best way to have true globalization
Yeah.
is to have identified local markets all around the world. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we as NXT UK, which was always really NXT Europe, do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You know, always really encompassed anyone from
Yeah.
Europe. Was the first one
Mm.
of that kind. Do you know what I mean? So we were on like the ground floor, and it's still the only one that they managed to do anything with. Right? They haven't managed to set up an NXT
No.
Japan or an NXT India,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a huge like the Indian market's an absolutely enormous market for them that they want to tap into.
Mm-hmm.
So they want to get to these. I gotta believe they still want to get to these kind of places, and it just felt like I mean, there's so many things that happened with regards to that like that pandemic and stuff. And it's not all the pandemic, obviously. Speaking out happened as well. Triple H had his health
Yeah.
issues.
Yeah.
The company was sold. There was the allegations involving Vince. Like
Mm.
all of these things
Yeah.
are in it. But you feel like if Triple H, certainly if there wasn't a
Yeah. Yeah.
pandemic and Triple H had remained healthy,
Yeah.
that because it was his vision, it was his baby, NXT and then NXT UK, that it could have grown, continued from strength to strength. Obviously, we'd have done that takeover in Dublin.
Mm.
We'd have probably come back and done some more in Blackpool. We hadn't done a takeover. We did Albert Hall in London, but we hadn't done a takeover in the
Yeah.
capital in London. That seemed like a natural progression. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There was loads and loads and loads of scope and room for that brand um, to grow, and certainly there was enough talented people here to do it as well. It never got to the point
Mm.
where we had a performance center that was full time.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it
Yeah. Yeah.
was always something which we went to in the weeks leading up to filming television.
Yeah.
It never got to a point where they had full-time trainers who were living over here, full-time strength and conditioning coaches who were living over here, a full-time writing team who were living over here, full-time producers and everything all living over here. But it was all moving in that
Mm.
direction. Do you know what I mean? They had a strength and conditioning coach who was based in the UK who was learning off the US strength and conditioning coach. Do you know what I mean? They had trainers who lived in the UK who were learning off the American trainers. They were starting to train different guys up in like the production roles
Mm.
and things. It was all
Yeah.
moving in that direction for us to be self-contained and for us to grow to a point where we could have maybe toured weekly. It needed to all be self-contained because it wasn't viable to fly over 5 or 6 people from America every single weekend. That's why it was filmed every 6 weeks. Do I think that if there hadn't been a pandemic and if Triple H had remained healthy, if it
Yeah.
would have grown? I think it probably would have.
Yeah.
But if,
Well, I mean, if
my
you look at
auntie
if
had
you look at
gentle, she'd be my uncle. Like
yeah,
it's
it's not, you took the words out
it
of my
is
mouth
what
there.
it
Actually, I
is,
was going to
right?
use that analogy. But like even if you look at like even shortly after that, like so WB obviously were invested in the UK because then like shortly afterwards they're performing in your hometown in Cardiff, and like even like just very shortly after, I was actually at that show and I was at the Progress show the following day where you made your return. Like how cool, or was there how cool was that for you? You're making your return to the independent scene. You're kind of returning to Progress Wrestling, where you kind of made such a big stamp beforehand, and it's in your hometown. What was that like for you then, getting to perform again and that on that massive weekend as well?
Yeah, it was a funny time that around that like the summer of 2022 because they closed the UK brand. We all got our phone calls kind of letting us know that we were released. I'd already been told that like, hey, because I'd done a couple of because in the last few years or the last few months maybe of NXT UK, I'd done a lot more managing work than in-ring work, and I was kind of trying to justify my paycheck. So I was trying to help out in backstage stuff where I could
Yeah,
and work with like the younger talents and stuff because I've always kind of been like the grown up in the room.
yeah,
So I've tried to help out with things like that where I could. When they did close the brand down and say that they were going to relaunch as Europe and all the rest of it, they kind of mentioned to me, hey, like we really appreciate your
yeah.
work. Hopefully, when things settle down, there might be something for you with regards to like writing if it's something that you're interested in. So obviously, I said that I would be,
Yeah.
but it was a strange time because I'd gone and done media for
Mm.
that Clash of the Castle show in the Millennium Stadium for the WB because I was a Welsh speaker. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'd literally done that a fortnight before being released by the company. But on the same token, it happened, and I was very much like, okay, back on the
Yeah,
indies, let's go. Do you know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
And I know that a lot of people were kind of like around the city that weekend, and there were people who worked for the WWE who did go to the stadium show, and there are people who didn't go to the stadium
Mm,
show, whether that was, it was a little bit too close to home, was a little bit too soon.
yeah,
And I was kind of wondering myself, and then I just thought of the fact that, like, oh, wait a minute, me, Mark, and Pete and a bunch of other people, Flash and Hitch and stuff,
mm,
like, we all did a show in 2011 or beginning of 2012 in Catay's Community Centre, just down the road from you 10 years ago, in front of 80 people, 40 of which were my friends from uni and 40 of which were Mark's friends from uni, and none of which were professional wrestling fans. Do you know what I mean?
yeah, yeah,
And and we thought it was the coolest thing ever. We thought we'd made it. Do you know what I mean? We thought we were rock stars. And it's 10 years later, and one of us, Pete, all right, it would have been nice if it was more of us, but one of us is about to walk out in the Millennium Stadium in front of 60,000 people, and whether it's an angle or running or whatever it is, he's going to walk out in front of that stadium, and I'm gonna sit in a hotel room
yeah.
for
No,
progress, because I feel a bit like but hurt. WWE released me 2 weeks ago. It didn't sit right with me at all, man. So I went to the stadium and I had a grand old time. And I watched Roman Reigns and Drew McIntyre have a wicked match. And I watched Tyson Fury come out and all the rest of it. And I had a great time, you know.
no,
So yeah, it was a super fun weekend to be involved in wrestling. I think I literally maybe got a phone call from WWE that weekend about whether I would be interested in writing as well. So I think it was all like
nice.
it was all kind of around the same time. It was shortly before I got married. It
Mm,
was the day after Mark got married. It's
nice.
real crazy. Like, we all
Yeah,
get released. Mark gets married. Mark's having a kid. We're going to the Millennium Stadium to watch Pete wrestle. I'm getting married. It's kind of like a
yeah.
wild time. The end of 2022, where so
Yeah.
many things, like from June of 2022 to December of 2022, like, our worlds just looked night and day, completely different.
Yeah, I know it was a funny, and that's really cool. The amount of kind of different things that are happening at the same time, all kind of acclimate or culminating that one weekend for you personally. But like, it was funny. Like, I later saw you and your kind of that return to independent run. I traveled over for the Rev Pro Rumble in 2023. And like again, as somebody who'd watched Rev Pro progress back in the day, I always found it mad. Even when I was researching, just chatting before this, you never won a match in Rev Pro during your initial run. Like, it was like I was going through, I was like, sweet Jesus, not even one. And then coming back, you obviously pick up a couple of wins, then retiring in the Rev Pro Rumble. And as your on Twitter says, another unretired wrestler. So that's a couple of different runs. What was that like? Obviously, I know you kind of touched on this previously about like you were humming and hawing. Will I retire from wrestling? Will I just take a step back from Rev Pro at the Rumble? Obviously, you got your WWE writing gig. You're due to emigrate shortly after this. What was that time like in your life?
So it was literally a case of, I got released by WWE in the summer of 2022, which is
Yeah,
kind of like this time about that the Clash of the Castle stuff and all that. Completely just got the bit between my teeth and was like, right, I'm going back to the indies. I'm going full bore. I'm just gonna, you know what I mean? Like, I never quit. Right, I never quit being a teacher to be a WWE wrestler. I quit being a teacher to make a living out of wrestling. So I was like, I can make a living out of wrestling without the WWE.
yeah, yeah,
Was like dead keen. Got the bit between my teeth. Was going for it. But it was a really expensive time in my life because I was getting married.
yeah,
We
yeah,
were going away on honeymoon, lots of stuff going on, remortgaging the house and things. And I was losing money hand over fist.
yeah, yeah.
Like, so I was having the best time. Like, that period from the summer of 2022 until the end of 2022 had some of my favorite professional wrestling matches.
Yeah.
Returned to the indies pretty much everywhere. I made like a conscious effort of never ostracizing myself from the independent scene. So one of the reasons why Andy Quildan, for example, welcomed me back into Rev Pro so quickly was because I'd still show up at Rev Pro shows and hide in the balcony and watch Connor and
Yeah.
Ojmo and stuff do their thing. Do you know what I
Mm.
mean? Because I had a vested interest in them as someone who kind of had like the smallest hand in
Yeah.
helping those guys out training back in the day. So, like I never left the independent community as far as I was concerned. You know what I mean? During the pandemic, I'd run like skull sessions with independent talent, just
Yeah,
from this office
yeah,
sort of thing. So I was always kept a hand in on the indies. It was just the case. I was having the best time. It was just the case that I was hemorrhaging money,
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
absolutely hemorrhaging money. So then in the January, I want to say, of 2023, the WWE reached out and like formally offered me the writing gig.
Nice.
And they were like, but the thing is about the writing gig, it's like a full-time job. Do you know what
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
Like you sign, like while you're living in the UK, you'll sign into the office remotely every single day. You'll work. While you're over here, you'll come to the office every single day. Obviously, we film live every Tuesday. So
yeah, yeah,
that's a full day. When you're over in Florida, you
yeah.
go to Coconuts on Friday and Saturday. Do you know what I mean?
Mm,
So they were like, so you wouldn't be able to carry on wrestling. It wasn't like a contractual
yeah,
obligation of like you can't be a wrestler. It was
yeah,
more just like you can't be a wrestler. Like there just isn't enough
yeah.
hours in the day. Do you know what I mean? You can't be a writer for WWE and have like a part-time hustle. It
Mm,
just isn't logical. Do you know what I mean? So I was gonna have to step away from wrestling
yeah,
if I wanted to take the writing job. I had to take the writing job because I was hemorrhaging money as an independent wrestler, and this was my like I'm 38. I was like
yeah,
this was my route to stay within wrestling.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Which I wanted to do. I wanted to remain a part of the industry.
yeah.
This was a way of me remaining the part of the industry for the next 10 or 15 years.
But
Um,
no, that's cool. I mean,
so I
even
was
like,
just
so, I
going to
mean, like,
stop.
yeah, I was gonna say, like, I mean, of all things, like, you get to 38, and obviously, adult matters come in the way, like getting married, mortgages, and all that kind of stuff. As I kind of view it as but then, like, getting offered, you're being thought of so well from your time in NXT UK that, like, you don't necessarily have, say, a writing background as such. You've got your teaching background, you've got your wrestling background.
I
You're
got a
loads.
C in GC. I got a C in GCSE
I know,
English.
yeah, but I mean, like, how
Terrible
cool?
writer I
I
am.
mean, how cool is that? I mean, the fact that they're gonna like, it's pretty hard to get a job in America, full stop, to get them to fly over, visas and all that kind of stuff. But then bring over there and then trust you enough to help you write a television program, not just write wrestling shows, a television program that's gonna be timed and formatted. Like that, I mean, obviously that says an awful lot about you and your willingness to kind of get muck in and get things done. But like, how big of a change was that then? Not just culturally, obviously, Florida's a mad place by all accounts, but what was that like moving from independent wrestling scene, putting shows together, to then kind of producing a television program?
Yeah, so obviously I stepped away from independent wrestling. I wasn't going to do the whole retirement gig. I was just going to stop wrestling, and then my last booking was that one in the Rumble,
Yeah,
and he was like, "Do you want to do something as like a story?"
yeah,
And I was like on the fence, didn't even know. And even when I got there to the venue, he was like, "Do you want to do?" We planned out like how it was going to go down, and I was like, "Do you want to do something after the Rumble?" And I was like, "Nah, I don't think I do." And then I had second thoughts and was like, "Oh, if I don't do it, I think I'll regret it. So let's do something." So I did the boots in the ring thing at the end,
yeah.
which seems silly now because I came back so much quicker. But like at the time, I was, I'd already done a little bit. Like I started as a writer, I think, in the February. So I'd
Yeah,
already done like 5, 6 weeks, 7 weeks maybe as a writer.
yeah.
I just figured that that was my job. Do you know what I mean? So that I wouldn't wrestle again. We never, like, I never did like actually emigrate out there. So the
Okay,
idea was always that I would learn how to be a writer
okay.
on NXT. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And then maybe by the time I'd learned how to be a writer, there would maybe be something over here. You know
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Was like the blue sky thinking of what would happen.
Okay.
So I spent 10
Mm,
weeks in Florida in 2023, which is
okay.
very difficult because there were 5 week trips. My wife couldn't come with me
Yeah,
because she runs a dance school over here.
yeah,
I missed being away from her.
yeah,
And I wasn't terribly happy in it. And ultimately that's why I left
yeah.
the writing role in November, right? I wasn't satisfied with it. I wasn't enjoying the process. Um, if they'd have if it had been a different world and
Mm,
they'd have got us a visa and they'd have helped me and my wife emigrate out there and I would have been writing for NXT living in Florida,
mm,
then I feel like maybe it would have been different.
yeah,
But I wasn't. I was writing for NXT, but living in Egham. And I was signing into an office at 4 p.m. and signing off at 1 a.m.
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
on a
yeah,
night owl at the best of times.
yeah, yeah.
And it's a creative environment, and there's like a room of writers, and you're a face on a screen, and it's hard to contribute. like creatively in that kind of environment because it's very discussive, and I felt like I was giving them way, way, way better version of myself when I was in Florida.
Yeah.
But when I was over here, I was just finding it hard. It's the middle of the night and I'm not in the room to converse anywhere. I'm like on a screen.
Yeah.
So I didn't believe I was giving them my best. So in the end, I just decided to ask for my release from the company, which they like, at least to my face, you know, they completely understood. Shawn Michaels and Johnny Russo, the lead writer, were like
Mm.
super nice and understood and almost like apologetic that it hadn't worked out the way that we'd all hoped
Mm.
that it would have worked out when I came on board in February, but understood why I didn't want to be in that environment.
Mm.
Like it was, people talk about like the braveness of when I left my head teacher role
Mm.
to wrestle full time, but like it felt much braver when
Yeah.
I quit the writing job
Yeah.
because that was like job for life with the company that was always supposedly the dream company. Do you know what I mean? And, you know, like when I left teaching to be a wrestler, I was a 29-year-old chasing my
Yeah.
dreams.
Yeah.
When I was a writer, and I left writing probably to have to go back to teaching.
Yeah.
I'm like a 38-year-old giving up on his dreams. So like that one is like
Yeah.
a lot braver. Do you know what I mean? And that one's a lot kind of like scarier
Yeah.
because you've got this role here in this company where you're like, I'm a company guy. Do you know what I mean? You
Yeah.
ask me to be somewhere, I'll be there. I'm always going to be on time. I'm always going to work hard.
Mhm.
Like I had no reason to believe that they would ever release me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, which is kind of why I knew that if I wasn't happy in the environment, the only way I was going to get out of the environment is if I was going to ask
Spot on.
to be released.
Spot on. I mean, like in
Yeah.
life, like half the time it's just working out like what you don't want to do, and like you're not going to figure out what you don't want to do until you do it as well. So like, listen, if you don't ask, you don't get. If you don't try, you don't know. So like, listen, that I
Yeah.
feel the bravery, even jumping into that world, going into something completely unknown. It might sound exciting going to Florida, but it's something you don't have necessarily experience with. It seems 99% of the planet don't have experience writing television as well. So, but listen, that was incredibly cool to kind of watch from afar. But you did something equally brave as somebody who's on Twitter too much as well. Me that you're tweeting out Eddie Dennis has come to the release with WWE. We wishes them well in all their future endeavors. Did you get any blowback for that?
No,
Okay.
they know. Like, I
Okay.
mean, they probably didn't even read it. I got 15,000 followers on Twitter. Do you know what I mean? Like, they can do that. And I think that they understand that it's
Yeah, yeah,
just in jest. Like,
yeah,
I've
yeah.
never said anything openly negative about the company. I never would say anything openly negative about the company. Like, they supported me through a global pandemic when no one else had a job.
Yeah.
They paid for multiple surgeries when I continually hurt myself whilst I was under their employment. And then when they wrapped up, they found me another role within the company and tried me out in that place. Like I'm nothing but grateful for the organization, but it was just a zinger, wasn't it? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
It
yeah.
was
It was
it
funny. It
was
was around
sat
that.
right
Yeah,
there. It was too good not to but hilariously,
yeah.
a bunch of people, because social media is like everyone just flicking through, just like glanced at it and thought that I was announcing that I'd been released. And I was like, no, I'm having a jibe at the
This is really
fact that
clever
I
here. Don't
quit.
give me my flowers. No, I've been really funny here.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
was a writer for 9 months to
Yeah.
learn how to say funny things like that.
Oh, no, fair play. Like, listen, when you appeared back up, I think it was Chaos Wrestling you reappeared in back in November. But that was before. I think people still thought you were a full-time writer. It was before you tweeted that out. I remember thinking that you kind of again spent too much time online. People thinking you're gone rogue and you're just like, fuck it, I'm home this weekend and I'm gonna go appear at a wrestling show, crowd to be damned or whatever. Like, what's that been like? And the whole your kind of return to independent wrestling and life in Wales full time since then.
Yeah, so that night, obviously, I think I'd like asked from I can't remember the exact, like I'd asked my release on the Thursday. They'd said, yeah, no worries, you can work up until Friday and then you're done. So then I messaged the boys and was like, shall I just come to Chaos on Saturday and do something? And they were like, yeah, do it. So
Yeah,
then I showed up at Chaos on Saturday and just did something. Obviously, a writer doesn't need like any kind of no compete clause or anything. It's not as if
yeah,
you're, you know what I mean, like you're bringing money anywhere.
yeah,
Um, so that obviously was a cool moment, and like that, I think like Sean Ross Sapp or something had tweeted like, "Isn't that guy a writer for the
Yeah,
WWE?" Like it got like some traction and stuff going. If anything, I think I probably like if I look back now at that time, like I wish I'd because it was all so quick. It was so like fly by the seat of your
mm,
pants. Um, I wish I'd like coordinated it a bit better. Like I wish I'd like I don't know because
yeah,
I think I could have made probably more of a splash
okay,
about the whole thing because as you say, I actually started showing up places when everyone still thought I had a job
mm,
as a writer there. So but I didn't really know what the best way
yeah,
to kind of do that was. And it was all so sudden. Like I really didn't know whether I was going to quit the writing job until the day I pressed send on the email. Do you know what I mean? Like
yeah,
I was really torn by it because it's financially like a really reckless decision for me and my wife, to be honest. Do you know what I mean? So I didn't know until I sent it that I was going to do it. But then, so when I quit teaching, like I handed my notice in to teach, for example, in the February of 2017, and then I didn't finish up in the school until the end of the academic year, which is like
mm,
July.
mm,
So I had like 5 months to figure out how to make like the best splash I possibly could at going full time. So I got James Musselwhite to film this really cool video, and I spoke to Brian Elliott, and I got to be the one to watch that month in Fighting Spirit magazine. And like I lined up good independent dates like on that weekend, and
mm,
I got some like mainstream new like the video that James put together got some really good traction. We ended up getting on like a bunch of
mm,
newspapers and a bunch of like mainstream media and things. But it was because I had 3, 4, 5 months to kind of like
mm,
construct it. I ended up having like 16 hours to figure out what I was going to do
yeah,
this
yeah,
time. So it was a little bit more of like winging it. Um, yeah, it was exciting,
yeah,
but it was also just more like I'm a real like I tell myself that I'm just gonna like chill out and just figure out what it is that I want to do. And
yeah,
then I woke up that Friday morning and I meet like my wife hadn't even got up and I'd already got a job
yeah, yeah,
because like my wife got up and she came downstairs and I was like, oh, I text Christine, who was like the principal of the school I used to work at. I've got a supply job on Wednesday.
really,
And it was like because I'm terrible. I tell myself, I'm like, Edward, you burnt out. You haven't taken a day off in however many years. Like, you've got savings from this writing job. There's no need for you to go into
yeah, yeah,
employment right now. Do you know what I mean? You can just chill out if you want, figure out what it is that you want to do. And yeah, like it hadn't even been 10 hours and I'd already arranged an interview at a school and a private tuition gig and a supply job and a bunch of independent dates. Like because that's just like
yeah, yeah.
my mindset. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, listen,
And
being
it just became a point where it was like trying to figure out. So now I'm back doing indies, but like I'm trying to be a bit more selective with them because I'm back working in a school.
yeah,
I'm working in the school is like the priority again now.
yeah,
And it'll probably be the priority unless like a WWE or an AEW
mm,
come over here and
mm,
want to establish something permanent over here. And if they did, and they were interested in having someone with some experience being in a backstage position, whether that's an agent, whether that's a trainer, whether that's a writer, then that's obviously would
mm.
be something that I would go for. But within wrestling, like anything short of an annual salary just can't be a priority at this stage of my life.
Yeah, I mean, like, listen, that's really cool. Like, I'd probably be like yourself. Like, if I suddenly, well, I left my job last year to go do an MBA in college at the minute, so like, I kind of do empathize in terms of shit. What am I gonna do now? What am I gonna do for income and whatnot? But
Yeah.
like, I'd be like you. Like, if I was able to get a job like that, I'd jump at it. Like that, just a weight off my mind to kind of stress out of it. At least got that comfort blanket. Then that gives you the I suppose that the freedom. Then like, oh shit, I'm gonna go to chaos tomorrow. I'm gonna have fun with my friends,
Yeah.
and you kind of make it splash. Like you were talking about, you don't know if it was the best thing to do, but making that surprise appearance sometimes that's making it splash as much as anything. So that's really, really cool. And like with the like talks of the likes of NXT Europe on the horizon, potentially NXT Japan or India, as you touched on previously. Like, I've no doubt, like they'll be looking for people within the country who've got experience, know how to work in the WWE environment. And I'd say, aside from trolling them by tweeting them, you've obviously made an incredible.
So that might have put a big cross next to my name, and I didn't realize it. Hopefully, they got a sense of humor.
Yeah. Well, listen, I'll send that. I'll clip that last part and send it to him. But yeah, Eddie, listen, I want to hugely thank you for your time. You're absolutely incredible, hugely insightful, and hugely transparent. I really do appreciate it, my friend.
Thanks, man. Thanks
No
for having me.
problem. Listen, have a good evening. Take care.
Sweet. Bye now.